Welcome to KM Auto Technic Service Information. In this film, we will show you the proper procedure on how to replace a clutch. Two simple functional tests can be performed to check if the clutch needs replacing. Firstly, whether the clutch disconnects properly. Begin by starting the engine. Then check the idle speed. Disengage the clutch, and after 3 seconds, you should be able to put the vehicle silently into reverse gear. The next test checks if the clutch slips and should be performed after a short drive to bring the clutch up to its operating temperature. Pull the handbrake while the engine is running and disengage the clutch. Put the vehicle in the highest gear and maintain the engine speed at approximately 2,000 revolutions per minute. Now, engage quickly. If the engine stalls, the clutch is fine. Should the tests, however, show that the clutch is not working properly, this film demonstrates how a professional replacement is carried out. Depending on the manufacturer and model of the vehicle, various preparations must be made before the actual replacement of the clutch can begin. Identify in advance the correct clutch using the KM clutch catalogs or KM's Tech Doc. When unpacking the parts, take care to avoid any contact with oil, grease, or other lubricants. In order to replace the clutch, the gearbox must be removed. Firstly, the shift linkage must be disconnected, and for vehicles with a central release bearing, the hydraulic line must be disconnected from the master cylinder. To ensure the safety of the mechanics and a professional working environment, support bars need to be installed. Use a gearbox jack to facilitate the removal of the gearbox. Disconnect the engine gearbox unit and slowly lower the engine and gearbox. The gearbox can now be carefully removed from the engine and swung out. The clutch pressure plate and clutch disc can now be dismantled. Before disassembling the clutch, it is necessary to insert a starter lock into the ring gear of the flywheel. Unscrew the clutch pressure plate from the flywheel. Take care to loosen the screws in a diagonal pattern, as this avoids damage to the springs and bearings. For a professional disassembly, loosen the screws in half turns, one after another. Once this is completed, the pressure plate and the clutch disc can be removed from the flywheel. Be careful that the clutch disc does not slip out of your hands. In order to professionally assess the condition of the flywheel, we recommend that it also be removed. Depending on the condition of the flywheel, it will need to be reworked or, better still, replaced. Check that the flywheel centering pins are securely tightened and check the contact surfaces of the clutch facing for grooves, ridges, oil, or grease. If you're not planning to replace the flywheel, but it needs reworking due to such damages, make sure you adhere to the manufacturer's maximum allowable tolerances for machining. Before the new installation, the radial shaft sealing ring on the engine side should be renewed to ensure a tight seal. Leaky seals are a common reason for slipping clutches, as oil or oil vapors can work their way through to the clutch facing. Begin by cleaning the surrounding surfaces to remove dirt and debris, and then check for scratches, cracks, or other damage. Use a small amount of silicone in the corners to ensure a perfect seal. Tighten the screws in a diagonal pattern. The correct fitting of a new radial shaft sealing ring will ensure a leak-proof seal, and the flywheel can now be installed. When installing the flywheel, new bolts must be used, as these are subject to high forces and pressures. In our case, the previously removed dual-mass flywheel can still be used. However, KM also offers conversion kits to a more stable single-mass flywheel. Ask for the KM heavy-duty kits. Pre-assemble the flywheel bolts and then tighten them to the correct torque, as specified by the various manufacturers for their car models. Again, here the bolts need to be tightened in a diagonal pattern. In our case, the flywheel is tightened in 2 stages. Always follow the manufacturer's specifications. KM uses only new parts, no reworked parts. Clean the new pressure plate at the contact surface to remove the corrosion protection. Be careful not to touch the surface of the clutch plate with dirty hands. The clutch disc can now be installed. In addition, we recommend to always replace the complete clutch kit, as all parts are subject to wear. The new clutch is fitted using a centering pin to ensure a 100% centering of the clutch. Without the use of a centering pin, it is extremely difficult to mount the gearbox. Again, the screws must be tightened in a diagonal pattern so that the springs of the clutch pressure plate are not bent. Tightening the clutch pressure plate evenly also avoids damaging the new clutch disc. Now grease the hub with the included KM High Performance lubricant. The KM High Performance lubricant is heat resistant and specially developed for this application. Do not use conventional lubricants, as these often liquefy and thus drip onto the clutch facing. Remove any excess lubricant to avoid it getting onto the facing. After installing the pressure plate and disc, the central release bearing can now be replaced. The new KM central release bearing includes an installation guide. Begin by removing the connecting bolt outside the gearbox. Now loosen the screws of the old release bearing and remove it. Clean the bell housing to remove any dirt and lubricants so as to avoid damage to the new clutch. Also, check the gear shaft for wear, dirt, and properly adjusted bearings before installing the new clutch. Grease the teeth of the gear shaft with the included KM High Performance lubricant, but be careful to apply the correct dosage to prevent excess lubrication. The installation of the new release bearing is done in reverse order. After replacing the clutch, the gearbox is swung back into place using the gearbox jack. Check that the guide pins on the engine block and bell housing are correctly positioned and ensure that they are not damaged. The threading of the gear shaft requires precision and patience. Once this is completed, the gearbox can be slowly pressed back onto the engine. Now, some additional work has to be done to complete the reassembly. Before the clutch and thus the vehicle is fully operational again, the clutch cable has to be readjusted, or alternatively, the hydraulic system must be vented. In this case, a brake bleeding device is used to pump brake fluid through the system until it flows bubble-free. Only the readjustment of the clutch cable or bleeding the hydraulic system can ensure a proper function of the clutch. After all the steps are completed, a test drive should be carried out with multiple gear shifts and startups. If no problems arise, then given good driving behavior, we can expect an extremely long life for the new KM clutch. If you require further information or have any questions, please do not hesitate to contact us.